Hello, everyone. We are live with the third edition of the Content Marketing Mentor Series. Today, I'm super excited to welcome Ardath Albee to our series of conversations, partly because I had the opportunity to work with Ardath on an ebook a while ago, and it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot from her, but also because I know she has a lot of wisdom to impart for all of us content marketers who are trying to make it work. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Cassandra Jowett, and I lead content marketing here at Mfluitive. We make advocate marketing software, and you might be wondering, why is an advocate marketing company talking about content? Well, there's a lot of ways that your customers can get involved in your content, and that's part of what we're talking about in this series. But generally, we want to have interesting conversations with some of the top content marketing mentors in the industry today. Learn about the trends, the different waves of content marketing opportunities and challenges that they're seeing, and see if we can come up with some interesting ways to tackle those challenges and approach those opportunities in the next couple of years as content and B2B marketing in general continues to change over time. So Ardath, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So for everyone who somehow doesn't know you, I feel like you're everywhere. You speak at every content event. You're always blogging and being featured on people's podcasts. But for anyone who, for some reason, doesn't know you, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, some of your awesome accomplishments, like your books, and what you're all about in the world of B2B content marketing?
Sure, absolutely. I have a company called Marketing Interactions that I run, and I founded it in order to help B2B companies driven content marketing strategies to engage their prospects across the buying process, what I call the continuum, and to become really effective with content. And I've written 2 books. The first, E-Marketing Strategies for the Complex Sale, which is what you get when you let your publisher title your book. And the second is Digital Relevance, that just came out last year. And I do speak a lot, and I just love helping people use content. It's just, I think, one of the greatest times to be a marketer.
Absolutely, and I always love seeing you speak at different events because you always tell it like it is. You're very blunt and honest, which is my favorite thing in most people that I like. So I always appreciate that, and I'm sure we'll get some of your bluntness in this conversation as well. But yeah, if those of you watching haven't had a chance to see Ardath at an event, I highly recommend that you go see her speak because she was one of the people who got me really, really excited about B2B content marketing when I first started in my career, and I always learn something from her when I talk to her. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today. So maybe if we could rewind a little bit, I just mentioned the start of my career. I'm curious how you kind of made your way into content marketing. What did that path look like, and what brought you to start your own company and help other companies with their content marketing strategies?
Yeah, well, it kind of happened by accident, actually. I have been running company 30 years, or about 25, I guess, and the latest was, or the last company was a technology startup. Think first ever iteration of marketing automation that actually included your website and was built for marketers to use themselves rather than go to IT to get things done. And this was in the year 2000, and companies had corporate brochure websites. And so they would take that content, put it in the new system, and then say, well, nothing changed, And I started looking at the content, and as the only non-techie person in the company who has a degree in English literature and who is a diehard writer, I write fiction for fun and develop characters and all that stuff. And so I started looking at their content, and I thought, well, this is really terrible. So I started helping them fix it, and things started to change, and they started seeing traction from their website, which they had never seen before back in the year 2000. And so it just kind of developed, and more of our customers were asking me to create content and strategies for them and help them engage online. And so in 2007, I realized, you idiots, you can do something you absolutely love, get paid for it, and have fun. And so I jumped in 2007 and started my consulting firm, and it's been nonstop ever since, but that's how it happened.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's interesting how many people who, basically thought they would do something totally different or, approached didn't really think about content marketing as their business necessarily, but then realized that there's a lot of opportunity both in the strategy and in the actual creation of content. When you come from a degree that turned you into a great writer. I come from a journalism background. Lots of us have come from that space as well. So I always love hearing people's journeys to content marketing because it's always so different and so interesting. So a little bit about what types of companies do you tend to work with today on content marketing?
Well, because of the way I transitioned into the market, a lot of my clients are tech companies. So I work with a lot of enterprise IT companies. I've also worked for a variety of other kinds of companies. I just did a project for a mutual fund company, an asset manager. I also have a long-term client who provides outsourced contact centers around the world to big companies. So I've done a variety of different work, but a lot of it remains in the tech realm, which is really fun for me because I love technology. And for some reason, I just have this ability to visualize what it can do, which makes it easy to write about it. And I find when, especially trying to find other writers to help me on projects, it's really a tough thing to find.
Yes.
Somebody who can write well about tech.
So true, which I think is why there's such a good opportunity for those of us who do get it, but it is challenging when you're trying to scale up sometimes and you're trying to find those other people who can help you out. But I mean, I saw your work in action when we did that ebook with Syntel, all about advocate marketing. You seemed to get it right away, even though we didn't really brief you at all. So it was awesome to see you at work there. And that ebook has done really well for us and our partner as well. So that's awesome. So you've seen content marketing across so many different companies and industries and topics. What are some of the things that have changed over the years that you've been working at content marketing in the B2B space?
Oh boy, well, there's a lot. I mean, some of the work I've been doing lately is really around content marketing operations. So really establishing the processes, the workflows, the team environment, the collaboration that has to go on cross-functionally in order to scale content marketing, to really get everybody on the same page. So just to give you an idea, the comparison, when I first started, I was usually hired by maybe a divisional demand generation manager who wanted a nurturing program for the industry she was managing or the product she was managing, and so it was a very siloed experience. So quite often we would be the only project within the company that was doing content marketing. Everybody else was doing advertising and other things. And so there was no continuity. Now what happens is I get hired at a higher level to do projects that range across the company. So creating personas for the entire company and looking at how that content marketing strategy rolls down to different divisions or product lines or what have you. And so it seems to be a lot more cohesive, looking for a lot more continuity. The challenge is that a lot of the companies I'm working for now have hired content writers. And so they're bringing a lot of the content production in-house. However, they don't know how to manage writers or really what to do with them. So I'm also now doing a lot of editorial consulting. So helping them, put those workflows together, helping also in the way they evaluate the content for consistency, for tone and voice and style that matches their positioning and brand. So, it's getting a lot more attention. But it's still, my biggest struggle still, and I rant about this all the time, is that companies are still focused on the campaign. And it's not about the campaign, it's about engaging the buyer, the prospect, all the way end to end and then into being a customer. So we have to get more fluid about the way we're actually looking at the experiences we create with content.
Definitely, yeah. It's really interesting that you point that out, the sort of evolution of, just working with freelancers and then now bringing content marketers in-house. But many of us tend to be pretty junior. Even having a director of content, I feel like is pretty uncommon, and definitely having it sounds like you're almost acting as a chief content officer for some of these companies. But maybe we need to have that more. We need to have that leadership to bring it more to the forefront. But you're right, it is happening, and it's interesting to see that evolution over time.
Well, I think, when you talked about my bluntness earlier, I think one of the benefits I have as a consultant is that I'm not afraid for my job. So I can go in there and stir the waters up and challenge the executive team and to really think differently. Whereas if you work for them, you may not be willing to do that. And so they can always, fire me. So people use me as kind of a way to promote the practice of content marketing without really putting themselves on the line. So for example, this year I've flown in a number of times to my clients' actual offices to present about personas and content marketing in front of the executive team to build buy-in, because they didn't feel like they could get enough attention or sway enough enthusiasm for the projects on their own. But bringing in somebody who's written 2 books, who speaks a lot, those kinds of things, as their consultant and lead on it, I've been able to help them get that buy-in. It kind of amazes me that we're still doing that, kind of 10 years down the road. But I think it's really important to be able to get that executive buy-in, because otherwise I've seen projects where they had a lot of promise, but as you know, content marketing takes a bit of time. And so I've seen projects cut off at the knees because nobody had the commitment to say, okay, our sales cycle is 2 years, so let's give this 2 years, or at least 1 year to see what progress we can make. Instead, it's like if something doesn't happen in 3 months, okay, we're done, cut it. And it just doesn't happen that fast. And a lot of companies, content marketing takes time and commitment. So, if I can help them get that buy-in and get their executive teams to understand, then I feel like that's doing a great service for them, to give them the space they need to actually, get some of this to work.
Definitely.
It's certainly not easy.
No, it's not. You mentioned, before we went on air, we were talking kind of behind the scenes, and you mentioned that, a lot of companies everyone's at different stages of their content marketing journey. Some people have been doing it for years and years now. Others are sort of just getting started and sort of totally greenfield ahead of them. And there's, they can tackle any opportunity and it'll be really successful for them. How do you kind of navigate that, when one company is super advanced and the next company you're working with is just getting started? How do you sort of apply your expertise in those different scenarios?
Well, here's my favorite answer. It depends. So it depends on the structure of the company, where they're really at, and it depends on how much they've already bought into it. And if there's a big difference between going in and helping a company improve what they're already doing versus taking a company that has been totally product driven and really getting them to understand the difference of, becoming extremely relevant to specific audiences that they can engage and motivate. And so, change is hard, right? If you've always done things one way, it's really hard to look at it a different way. And so it's a continual process of reinforcing, flip that feature to the benefit, think about it from the other side and helping them see that. And even companies that have been doing this for a while tend to fall back into that because it's the way we've always done it, right? We've always talked, especially in technology, we've always talked about our products. And it's sometimes, I think the biggest difference is that we know too much. And so we expect people to already understand they need our solution, and now we just have to convince them to buy ours. Mm-hmm. But we don't start early enough. We have to get all the way back into what is their status quo today, and how do we get them to even start thinking about solving a particular problem, because believe me, they have a workaround for it. It may be a pain in the butt, but they're doing whatever they're doing today in a way that's working, or their company would have failed. So how do you get them to start thinking about the fact they need to do something different that your product enables? So we need to think about it from a more holistic way, rather than just thinking people are out there looking for our solution, so let's go make them choose ours versus the competitors, right? And so we need to think about it in a whole different way, and we need to really talk about it in relation to their experience, what their problem is, their point of view. And that's kind of a tough thing to do when you already know so much about your product. So I think some of the value that I bring is that I read fast. I have to learn about the product fast. I don't know know everything about it. And I can help them think about it in different ways as I learn about it to help them realign their thinking. And so I think sometimes that's the value of bringing somebody in from the outside, is that we come in with a different point of view.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You talk a lot about understanding what the buyers really want rather than what we want them to do. And I know you're really big on personas. Do you see that most companies have robust persona work already done when you come in, or is that something that you kind of do along the way and help them see the light a little bit?
Well, let's put it this way. I get a lot of companies who call me and say, we already have personas, we just want a content strategy. And I say, great, send me your personas, which they do. And I look at them and say, well, what do you do with these? And they say, we have no idea. Because they're just not, I've actually seen personas sent to me that people paid a lot of money for, and they're in templates where you actually see the same phrases across the personas because they didn't change them from what was in the template before, and the research that they do isn't deep enough. And so when you evaluate a persona and you go through it and you see a bunch of stuff in it that you can't use, like for example, in B2B, my favorite pet peeve is they're 43, married with 2 kids, they live in the suburbs, drive a Volvo, and have a golden, an Irish wolfhound or whatever, right? What are you going to do with that as a B2B marketer? Nothing. It's not useful. And so instead, you want to look at things like their professional traits. They've been in their career for 20 years. They've been at the majority of them tend to grow their career within the same company, which means they know where all the bodies are buried, versus, somebody who's just starting out, junior, maybe 3 years in their career, is going to be a whole different conversation, right? So we need to make sure that when we create personas, we're actually diving for that information that's going to inform something. And so really personas should be able to stand up a content strategy if they're done well. They should provide that level of insight. And I don't see that very often. I think once I saw that. But, by the same token, I've seen a set of well-done company personas, but they didn't do the roll downs for the different industries or product lines. So we had to do that work in order to pivot from the higher level overview to get down to the specifics to sell a particular product or to an industry in order to grow the relevance around that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. It's interesting. There's a trend right now for everyone to say how customer obsessed they are, how much they love their customers, and it's, actually seeing it in practice in their marketing strategy. And I think content marketers are among the worst offenders sometimes because they're often so far removed from the customers that they just don't actually either, I wouldn't ever give someone the chance to say they don't have the opportunity to talk to customers, because I think everyone can find opportunities, but they don't have any reason to talk to customers most of the time from where they're sitting. So actually working that into their content is, just not second nature in any way.
Well, the other problem we have, for example, I'm doing a big project right now where we've made great strides in talking to people across the company, but now that it comes time to interview their customers, the salespeople and account managers are not helping us.
Right.
And so it's a big fight to actually get the introductions and set up the customer interviews. And in my opinion, that should never happen. They should be thrilled and excited that we want to actually learn more about the customers and to help them as well. So content marketing isn't just for marketing, it's also content for sales enablement, and all the way across the buying and customer life cycle. And so, salespeople may be struggling, but then they can be their own worst enemy by saying, well, we don't want to let you talk to our customer. I don't think that should ever happen, but it makes it difficult to get the work done.
Absolutely, yeah. It can be tricky. Most companies are not set up to have a direct line from marketing and content marketing directly to customers, which is unfortunate. But I think we're starting to see that change a little bit through things like advocate marketing and just more customer experience, customer engagement focus, and marketing sort of owning more of the customer experience overall. But I think that's still very hopeful, and all the analysts are talking about it, but the reality at most companies doesn't necessarily match what the analysts are forecasting yet.
Right, but we also have a big opportunity through social media to actually, even if we're listening rather than actually engaging, to watch our customers. and learn from them and understand things they're talking about and things they care about. One of the things that I do basically is live on LinkedIn, because where else can you find an entire portal where people have created profiles about themselves and what they do? And so when I'm working on a project, I can learn a ton by going out and doing a search for people who would be representative of the persona I'm working on. But even better, go to Google and type in a day in the life of, and then add the role and see what you get back. I found some tremendous conversations of people just talking about a day in the life of the role that they do.
That's really
so you can. Yeah, it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's
one time I was doing a geophysicist persona, and I actually found a discussion group on LinkedIn where a mother whose daughter wanted to go to college to become that had actually put a question out there: could you please tell my daughter about a day in your life? And over 80 of them participated, and I mean wrote volumes about what they do and what her daughter should look for and think about, and all kinds of things. I mean, it was just a treasure trove of information. So there's a lot of ways we can learn about our audiences, even if roadblocks get put up in front of us for actually speaking to them directly.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great advice. I think for a lot of people, persona development seems like a lot of work, and it can be, but you just pointed out a few tips that make it easy to at least get started and think outside the four walls of your company and what you think about your customers. I remember I met a content marketer who was just starting out, and we went for coffee, and he was asking for some advice, and he mentioned that he was coming straight from school. He had just graduated, and he was about to embark on a 6-month persona development research project, and he was going to do that before he created any content, because that's what he read online that he should do in order to create great content. And I was like, that's really interesting, but you need to shorten that timeline, because you're going to get fired if you don't create any content for 6 months. So you need to do the legwork, but maybe there are some tricks that you can shorten the timeline and make your process a little more efficient than doing a 6-month academic level research project on your customers.
Well, yeah, you're right. You can't stop everything to do something else, and so there's ways you can do it iteratively. So I've done projects where we've had to get content out the door at the same time we're developing the personas, and so you have to pay really close attention to what you're learning along the way, and punt a few times to create content from just what you've learned without having the whole picture, but at least with a chance of better relevance and engagement than you would otherwise have. And so, it's the first thing I do when I build personas is do all the internal interviews with product and sales and marketing and customer service. You can get a lot of insight and ideas from them. So then while you're finishing up the personas with the customer interviews, the external research and all that other stuff, you can get some things out, and hopefully they will be created well enough that they will fold into your content marketing strategy that you develop on the other side.
Definitely. You mentioned there are a couple of the benefits of doing your persona homework, making your content more relevant and engaging. What's sort of the risk, if you don't do that work, if you don't have your customers in mind when you're actually creating content, and you actually know in and out what they really need from you as a vendor and as a provider of good content, what's the risk there that many of us could face if we don't do that work?
Well, first of all, wastage. So I was just reading a report this morning where I can't remember if it was the VP or CMO at Cisco said that 0.1% of their content gets used. You know how much content Cisco puts out? I've worked for them before, I know how. But I mean, 0.1%. And you see, Serious Decisions has said 70% of B2B content goes unused or whatever. And so imagine the forecast is we're going to be spending collectively $43 billion on content next year. If 70-80% of that goes unused, or God forbid 0.1% of it is effective, how much money are we wasting? I mean, that's not sustainable. And so we, instead of just cranking out content and publishing it, we have to really figure out what makes it work, right? What does it drive towards business objectives? You know, how can we tie those things together? How do we get better at it? And so quite frankly, I've worked with a couple of clients that say, you need to really ratchet back your content production to create better pieces. Andy Crestodino, and you might have talked about it in his video interview, but he just released the blogging report that his company does. And what they found was people are producing less content, longer content, better content for blogs, and which is a step in the right direction. You know, we think that we need to publish, you know, five times a week or 3 times a day or whatever that number is, and we keep churning out this content. Quite frankly, your audiences can't read that much from you. They are reading stuff from other people too. But if you put out one really good piece, you know, every couple of weeks or even once a month or whatever, and you get that engagement and they want to learn more, you've done better than if you've cranked out 20 blog posts that nobody reads, or they read and they leave without doing anything because you haven't motivated them. So I think there's going to be this come to Jesus kind of meeting or evolution where we go, okay, it's about better content, not more content. And it's something marketers always get stuck in, is that quantity thing. You know, we get evaluated on how many leads we develop, how much content we push out the door. Something has to give somewhere where you start saying, you know, I'd rather have 10 really solid prospects that are going to spend $1 million a piece with me than have 350 who I can't sell a dang thing to, you know, or I'm only going to sell one of them. So we need to start thinking about it in a different way. I mean, I've heard it bandied about a lot, you know, this thing about in what job would a 5% performance effectiveness rate mean you're successful, you know? And basically, if you look at the response rates to email campaigns and lead generation and whatever, you know, I mean, 95% of what we do or 90% of what we do fails. Since when is that acceptable? We have to start turning the tide on that. And I think we do it by doing less, but doing it better and more concentrated, right? We have the technology to track a ton of stuff. And yet marketers are still saying, we don't know how to measure our content. We're not sure what's effective. We're, you know, I mean, when is this going to give? We have to do better than that. So there's that bluntness you were looking for.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. You don't sugarcoat anything, and I think that's what most people need to hear. No more sugarcoating about content, because it's obviously not working. So you know, you touched on a pretty important issue there. You know, all of us in, you know, marketing and B2B marketing in particular have turned on our marketing automation systems, our CRM systems, and you know, now we're all, you know, we've scaled up our content operations. We're churning out content, tracking it. And we're not really getting the response rates that, you know, maybe we all hoped for, or, you know, maybe if we were early adopters, we saw really great response rates and they're starting to decline. And so, as you said, we're looking for ways to make everything more effective, more relevant, more engaging. For you, aside from publishing, you know, less often, you know, what does creating better content mean? You know, I think it's sort of a generalization. So I'd love to hear, you know, how do you determine what's good content, aside from it's doing well?
Well, quite frankly, to me, there's a disconnect in the way we create content. So for me, I'm a storyteller at heart. And so what I do is look at the buying process and think, okay, what do people need to learn to solve a problem as they work through each stage of their decisioning process, right, their evaluation? And so what I teach companies to do is build kind of iterative or serial storytelling type of programs. So for example, I have nurture programs that have now been in place for 5 years at a particular client. And every year we just update, you know, we evaluate, and we may switch out a piece or two here or there, but they're built around telling the story of solving the problem that one of their solutions can deliver or enable. And consistently over the last 5 years, these nurture programs have generated millions of dollars, which is why they're still in place. And quite frankly, they spent about $100,000 to have this series of content developed that they continue to use, and then they refresh it every year to update statistics and things like that. But the reason it's successful is because it's useful. It helps people think about what they need to think about in a way that they can absorb, because this is a big, highly complex solution, and it takes them step by step forward through this process. It's this story that unfolds over time and helps them embrace it, helps them also talk to others on the buying committee. Quite often we address personas in a, kind of singular fashion, where we have, this nurture track for Mary, our persona Mary, and we have a nurture track for David, we have a nurture track for Steve, but we act like they don't talk to each other. Buying committee, they do, and we don't think about what does this process really look like. So how could we provide content that helps them talk to each other, answer the pushbacks from each other, to keep everybody moving forward. I think we don't think about what the content should enable. We just think about getting a piece of content out there that people will engage with and like, and we think that's enough, but it's not. So, most of my clients, granted, have long buying process. So, 2 to 5 years, say. That's a long time to have to engage people and different people at different times to accomplish things. But we really need to think about, these days, the new word is the experience, right? Use content to create experiences, but we don't really think about what that means beyond the experience for the one person we may be targeting. Instead of, okay, there's what I think CEB is up to 7 people in the buying committee now or something instead of the 5.4. But, what are we doing to engage all 7 of those people, not only individually, but how do we help them engage with each other so that the conversation continues to move forward and doesn't stall out? I mean, 90% of the time right now, we're not losing to a competitor. We're losing because they couldn't make a decision. So how do we help enable that with content?
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like? So I think we need to think about content and what it enables more than just we need to publish a white paper, or we need to talk about this topic. We need to think about how does that figure into what buyers need to do and know, and how do we help develop that? And I'll stop ranting now.
It's good. It's good ranting. It's all good stuff. I mean, the thing you're touching on there is really important because, instead of just putting out another white paper and hoping that we get awesome results, serving all those buyers is becoming really key in understanding what, not just, who they are and what their job is like, but also how they want to evaluate the solutions they need to solve their problems, and making sure that you're kind of giving them everything they need along the way, creating that experience that will really help them make a good decision, make any decision, and in an ideal world, make it a little faster so our buying processes speed up a little bit. I think most companies are pretty bad at that, and just speaking as someone who buys marketing technology, sometimes it can be a pretty painful experience, and it's hard to get at what you really need because there's so much stuff out there to wade through, and you're like, actually, I mostly want to just talk to other people like myself who have used this and learn what they're doing, and then hopefully turn to the company for a bit of expertise about how to get better at this as someone in my role. So that's just me. It may be different in other industries, but it's interesting that we hope that these sort of link bait blog posts and 40-page white papers will get people across the finish line.
Yeah, it's interesting in some of the projects I'm working on these days that are really complex, expensive sales. We're finding that a lot of what we need to do is actually sales enablement content because of what you just said. People want to speak face to face. There's proprietary stuff involved. They need to be able to sit down and have those conversations. They also need the supporting materials, and quite often they're not out looking for them, but they'll take them from salespeople. We need to prepare our salespeople to really engage. So I'm working on one project now where 2 of the personas that we really need to engage, marketing cannot engage, right? They're not paying attention to where we can publish content, those kinds of things, but salespeople to content. And so we need to empower our salespeople to engage those 2 while we work on engaging the other 3 or 4 that we can to kind of round out that whole experience and that progression towards, purchase. And so I think, there's a combination of things. It's one of the reasons why sales and marketing alignment is so important these days.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, content can serve at many different stages of the buying process and through many different channels. And I think we often think of content marketing as just what's sent through email in a marketing campaign. But as you said, we need to get away from campaigns and more looking at how we can enable our buyers to, get what they need and also arm our salespeople with, effective content that will help them be seen as trusted advisors and not just pushy salespeople.
Well, yeah, and also to your point or Influitive's point, there is a lot to be said for referrals, for customers who will actually talk about your company enables for them in a public manner on social media or wherever. That's huge. It's one of the most trusted ways people get information. And so the more we can empower that, the better off we are. The problem is that we're still so stuck in top of the funnel type stuff that we're not actually spending a lot of time as marketers on customer retention and empowering our customers to actually become our advocates. And I think marketing needs to kind of expand their focus across the entirety of the customer life cycle so they can hit on these other key elements. And, that's a big thing. But I think we need to take a more holistic view. We can have impact in a lot more areas, and the more reports I see that say CMOs are going to become primarily responsible for the entire customer experience, and I kind of shudder and think, okay, you better start expanding your purview now, so you see the whole process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this is my opportunity to hijack the conversation around advocacy a little bit, but those, aside from just referrals, people are our buyers are looking for ways to validate the vendors they're looking at. It's so easy to start a software business now compared to back in the hardware days that there are so many different options for everyone. It can be really overwhelming. How can they actually understand, even from a shortlist perspective, who might be a good option for them? And I think, one of the reasons I joined Influitive even is because content is a really great way to do that. Injecting those voices as early as possible, even in your top of the funnel content, can be really effective. We're seeing it now with influencer marketing. You're a content marketing influencer, and we have you on this conversation, and you're talking about the things that are really close to our hearts as well. So all of that, plays in together about creating a bit more authentic content, about borrowing other people's voices to share in the greater conversation around the strategy of your industry. For us, it's marketing, but it could be anything really. I guess maybe I'm pulling back the curtain a little too much now on what we're doing, but it's so important. Are you seeing any of your clients thinking about ways to incorporate their customers' voices more into content, whether it's just gathering their ideas or actually getting them involved in content production or distribution or anything like that?
Oh, absolutely. We do customer interviews during the persona process, and they're actually sitting on the call in the background while I'm running the call, and they're listening to what their customers are saying about not only their roles and everything else, but working with their company. Excuse me. And they get ideas for not just use cases or testimonials or other things, but just ideas of maybe how they could involve their customers in, helping them determine what information would be more impactful for them, helping just by understanding their role more. They become fascinated by it because a lot of them haven't been exposed to it. But the thing that's really interesting is when they hear verbatim what their customers say, a lot of it can be shocking, because it's not anything that they would think. A lot of them think either they're a lot better than that or didn't think they were as good as their customers think they are. It can go either way. But it's interesting, and I make sure that my clients sit on these calls because I don't want it to be a big shock when I walk in and say, okay, here's what I found, here's what you're going to do. And they're going, what are you talking about? So I want them to hear it verbatim. And, I think the funniest one was when I was on a call and my client forgot to mute her phone, and she gasped when the customer said something that she wasn't expecting. And, but it's really important to get that feedback. But the other thing about it that I find really cool is I don't think I've been on one customer interview where they haven't said, we're so glad client is doing this because we really feel like you care now. We feel like we're being better understood. We're excited to see what you do with it. I mean, they're thrilled to death that they're getting that kind of attention, and the company is actually expending effort to figure out what they care about. And the end result is they end up being more willing to participate in helping with the generation of content, with use cases, case studies, testimonials, mentioning things on social media, sharing with their networks, or willing to be references. And I think it's really critical, but it just goes to show how much of an opportunity we're leaving on the table by not even trying to engage with them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, I think there's something we have to watch out for there as well, where, you say you get all these great customer interviews, you talk to them, gather all the feedback, you have your aha moments or your gasp moments with your customers, and then you don't actually apply it to any of your strategy. How do you make sure that doesn't happen? And as sort of a stand-in chief content officer, chief content strategy person, how do you make sure that you take that insight and actually bake it into the strategy and ultimately the content you're releasing? A lot can get lost along the way. So I'm curious if you have any tips on that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, that's kind of my job. Usually I'm not just going in and doing personas and walking away. Usually I'm doing personas and then we're rolling that into content strategy. And so I'm making sure that everything gets transferred along. Sometimes it's been tempting to me the last few years to maybe even consider going back to corporate just so I could see everything all the way through. Because it gets frustrating to go in and do something and then have them say, okay, your project's now over, and I leave and I don't know whether they executed it, whether they executed it well, whether they followed the plan, whether in the case of when I just do personas, did they actually ever use them for anything? And so sometimes I don't have a lot of control over that. But what I do know is for my customers who do execute well, the difference is amazing, and they can point to revenue, and contributing to downstream revenues, and they can point to how much they contribute to pipeline and increase speed to revenue. So it's even in this noisy, crowded world, if you become highly relevant to your target audience, you are going to see the difference. Because there's so much junk out there, it almost is easier than when there wasn't any content because there wasn't anything to evaluate against it. Now when you put out really great content, people go, whoa, this was impressive, because they've read so much crap before that it really stands out. You know what I'm saying? It presents a different comparison. And so, if you just think about the fact that the one customer I talked about who has a nurture program in place for 5 years and still delivering millions of dollars in conversions each year, and the noise has become even louder during those last 5 years, and it's still working, that's impressive. And those are the kinds of things we need to start contributing to. The problem I see a lot of times is that marketers don't tie their content marketing programs to business objectives, which hinders them in the ability to say, here's where we contributed, here's where the ROI is really coming back to you, because sometimes it's not a straight line to revenue, right? But if we tie to objectives, we have a way to talk about it that our executive team will care about. If we only are talking about, we increased traffic, we generated X thousand of leads and whatever, but we don't know what that impacted or what it tied to, it's not effective, because your executive team could care less. If you generate 1,000 leads and you can't tell me if they bought anything, do I care? No, right? So we have to get better about how do we position our content marketing programs within the company, right? How do we speak the business language of our executive team to actually demonstrate the impact we can have on what they care about, the business objectives they are setting for the company, right? Then it becomes all about them. And that's, a key. So it's kind of like, okay, go apply your persona and your marketing to your executive team, right? How are you going to convince them that what you're doing is, what they want and need? And so it's almost selling it within, the company. We can use the skills we use on our buyers and customers, towards our executive team to get buy-in, right?
Definitely. And I think also, you mentioned having trouble working with account management or sales to get customers. I think part of that is content marketing, building a relationship with those teams and aligning on company objectives to make sure that, if you are asking for something big like that, there's something that will benefit all of you together and you're all working toward what the company is trying to achieve. You're not just sort of that little writer alone in your corner typing away, creating a bunch of content and hoping for the best. You have those connections to sales, customer success, account management, maybe even product development. Don't want to create product-y content necessarily, but you need to understand your product and know what's coming down the pipeline and maybe which new markets you're entering, those types of things. So relationships sounds like they're key to this as well.
Absolutely. And those will also become easier to come by if you get your executive team buy-in. So it makes a big difference if you're going after trying to get salespeople or account managers to set up introductions for you to do interviews. If you've got their boss saying you need to get behind this program, right? That makes a huge difference.
Definitely. All right, before we run out of time, I just want to make sure that we answer this audience question that came through. Well, first I'll give you a little bit of positive feedback. Someone said, I'm loving this webinar, Ardath. Everything you're saying is music to my ears, so that's really nice. And then David, thank you for tuning in, whoever wrote that. There's no real name, it just says event marketing, so I'm not sure who that person is, but interesting. And then David Barry asked, how can you possibly reach 5 to 7 personas and develop content for each? It's so very complex. How do we make it simpler, or else it just won't get done?
Yeah, true. Personas are a content multiplier. So sometimes, it depends on what you have resource to do. If you only have resource to address 3 personas, then don't build 7 because it's a waste of your time. But the other thing is we need to look at where can we get economies of scale. So for example, I have a client and I work with the leads in 3 different industries. Each of them have 4 personas, that's 12. Right? And so if you multiply that out, it becomes a nightmare. But what we've discovered is that when we were working on the content strategy, the storylines for each of the industries, we discovered that the 4 personas needed some of the same information. At different times they needed the same information, but here's the thing. They wouldn't, engage with it. It wouldn't be effective if it wasn't set up to their perspective. So the body of the content could stay the same. We changed the title, the introduction, and the conclusion, and maybe edited a few things for the flow and the body of the content, but it allows us to take one piece of content, turn it into 4 persona-specific pieces of content that serves a need they all have. And so if this is the value of looking at how are we going to engage them across the entirety of the buying process, given the customer journey, what they need to know at each stage. If we do this work in advance, we can look for opportunities like that where we can repurpose the same content across personas, which lessens the total number of assets we have to create. Another example of that is a client of mine was doing kind of like an analytics report on different industries. And what we figured out was the format of the report and the way they were pulling analytics, they could do the same, get the same kind of data for each different industry. And we could just kind of spin that report given the differences in each industry. And therefore, once again, we're creating content across that slate of personas. So we need to look for economies of scale. We also need to look for what can build on what. So for example, when creating a storyline, each piece of content should build off the last. And so if you've created it in that way, it's possible to research and to create 2 or 3 pieces of content all at the same time because you've done that research and the story flows, rather than thinking, okay, I've got one topic here, okay, now let me write about this other thing over there, which requires a whole different research project, right? And so if we have to get smart about how we think about producing the content, and if we create content that flows together, we can do the research at one time and write it and then break it apart. Put it back together to create a bigger content piece. So we have to get more creative about the way we think of producing it. Is that helpful?
I think so. Maybe David can let us know if that answered his question, but I can see very easily why you're advising companies on their content operations and processes, because you obviously have thought a lot about this and you understand how to make it work. But it sounds like, just identifying some commonalities among some of your personas and trying to scale up instead of reinventing the wheel every single time and feeling like you have to create totally unique content for each persona at every stage of the buying process. Assuming your company doesn't have totally different, disparate solutions, maybe it's one solution and you're appealing to a few of those different personas that are part of the buying process, then there must be some commonalities there that you can build upon and relate to, and also help them relate to each other as they navigate their own unique buying processes.
Yeah, and the other thing to think about that I think is really important is that it may look daunting at the beginning. Let's say you have 7 personas and you're thinking, oh, holy crap, how am I going to write content for all of these? But if you do it in a systematic way, the thing to realize is once you get that stream of content or that storyline created for each of your personas, you don't have to do it all over again. If you've created it well, you should just be able to augment, maybe insert a new piece here and there in the flow when something new comes along. But you've got a solid foundation of content that you can use in different ways and reuse. So it's not, this thing about just because it's Tuesday, we need to publish a blog post has to go. If we create a good, solid set of content that addresses needs across the buying process, then we can reuse it and we can just augment it as things change. And we're not facing this, oh my God, I have 7 personas to develop content for every year. Like you said before, reinventing the wheel. We don't need to do that if we do it right the first time.
Definitely. So hopefully David is pretty happy with that answer. I think we have time for one more question from the audience. This one comes from Kathy Howes. I don't think it would be a conversation about B2B marketing without a question like this. Are there any specific tools you recommend for building that content plan? It seems like it could be quite complex.
Oh, geez. Well, I use Trello to manage, my projects and things like that. But also in disclosure, they're a client. I'm also helping clients implement Compost to create workflows and, to really manage that editorial calendar and the processes behind the content creation. There are different initiatives, and there are a lot of platforms that do that. Compost is certainly not the only one. But I think if we're going to scale content production, there comes a time where we have to take our content operations seriously, and we need to get some of the technology in place that supports that. And so a content workflow platform, I think, is really critical because it unites the different people on the teams that are responsible for different parts of it. And it's really hard to do that in a Google Docs spreadsheet or by email, and shipping stuff around, because the visibility gets hindered, right, by not having things available in one place. But the other thing that I think is really cool, because here's the thing that's going to save us, is the ability to repurpose and reuse content. When you have a platform that houses all your content, you can tag it all in different ways. So you know what you have for each persona, for each topic, for each, question and answer, whatever, however you want to look at it. You can take that content easily, either repurpose it or reuse it. Part of the reason why so much content gets wasted is that we put it out there and we think, okay, we're done, and we never revisit it again. Like, for example, if content isn't working, fix it, put it back out there, right? Or, take it and combine it with 3 other pieces and create some kind of a report or a paper or something. But, we need to get economies of scale. And unless we get visibility, we can manage all of it, that's a problem. And the other problem is how we deploy content to the rest of the organization. So it's not just sales, customer service needs access to it. Your employees that are communicating on their own social networks, could be instrumental in sharing it. But most of the time, people just don't know, what it is and where it is. And I think, we need the technology to change that. So that's where I would be looking first, is where can we actually empower workflows to get this work done and get better visibility and management around our content. So, whatever platform you choose, I think that would be a solid way to approach this.
Definitely. It's less about the exact tool probably and more about how you actually manage your inventory and your process. We use Trello and Asana here at Influitive. Not quite big enough for something like Kapost yet, but you can see a lot of potential with tools like that to scale and also distribute content and make it part of the broader marketing strategy. Knowing how all of it is being distributed, like there's so many disconnects once you've created the content. You kind of like sometimes hand it off to someone else and hope for the best. So it's great to see how it kind of connects all these different pieces together and provides a lot more visibility both into what's being created, when it's going to be delivered, but also the distribution side of it too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, I think those are all the questions from the audience. So 5 minutes left. We'll probably leave it at that. Thank you so much, Ardath, for joining us today. It was great chatting with you again. And I hope everyone watching this got as much out of our conversation as I did.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Great. All right. Well, take care, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And we'll be back in January with the next Content Marketing Mentor series. So stay tuned for that and have a great week. Take care.